appreciating and enjoying the discussion. And obviously today we carry on with that with a little bit more of a focus to the persona data citizens. Just thanks very much to Paul and Howard for your preparation once again. We're really looking forward to the discussion, and yeah, that's all I really have to say. Just about the recording again, because we do publish the recordings on request the day after or from the day after for those that either miss it or miss a part of it or just want to listen again. Yeah, enjoy the discussion. If I may, Paul, just before you kick off, Renee was on first today, and she said she posted a question to us, to you, and we didn't seem to respond. I don't recall seeing it, but if Renee, if you're there, if you could please unmute and ask your question, I'm sure Paul and Howard would gladly assist and answer you.
Can we first apologize?
Sure, go, yeah.
Yes, profusely.
It's Lena Pillay here from Johannesburg. Yes, I did find last week's session very intriguing, but I was very concerned, and I'm trying to propose this question to everybody who can assist me. We have like 62 source systems where we are extracting the business partners and moving it into S4HANA. So currently what we're doing is extracting it from the source, taking it into boards, and there we're doing some kind of cleansing, harmonization, etc., which is not really helping us before we get it into MDG and then replicate to S4HANA. So I'm trying to find a way around, a better way around the harmonization in boards. So if anybody there has any suggestions, I'll really appreciate it.
All right, thanks. Maybe that's something we can take afterward. If we go through, just through the content, and that'll be a nice discussion point that we could either take up now, or it sounds like it might be a good idea also to just connect with you privately for a chat, Renee, so we can do that too.
Well, let me add it to the questions at the end.
All right.
And then we will deal with it if we can. So let's see if we can answer it today, and then we don't get lost in the discussion.
Right.
Awesome. Thanks, guys.
Thank you.
That's good. Thanks for that, Paul. All right. So I'm gonna just a reminder of the order and the dates. So last week we looked at BI managers on the eve of a long weekend. I was again surprised at the number of people that attended. We had very good turnout, good discussion, and today's focus is on data citizens, and then we have 2 more left for the rest of the month, and they all have different flavors. We cover some of the same content, but it's really different presentations altogether. So please be nice if you can join those as well. Howard, do you want to add anything to that?
Yeah, I just want to. There may be some people that just joined for the first time. So our data citizen refers to almost your business user of data. So when we use the term data citizen, meaning that anybody within the business that uses data, they must adhere to the rules set by the organization about data usage and data manipulation. Now, typically, as examples, we would have our data stewards as a data citizen. We could have the users of data, the guys that make use of BI, who build reports, and then your data scientist as an example.
Cool. Okay, so let's get cracking then. Yeah, maybe just if you don't know any of us, Howard Diesel, he's sort of leading these webinars, hosting them every month. I'm joining him specifically on MDM this month. Paul Bolton is also always there to pick up questions and also answers, and remind us when we fail to answer, input from the LinkedIn group. All right. Okay, so we'll be looking at these 4 or 6 topics today, and let's just start with who are the data citizens. It is, as Howard just said, so this whole talk is really geared towards the users of data in some way, whether it's data scientists or data stewards or just power users, or people who fool around on BI, or people who are purely who don't have the title data in their title or KPI or anything like that, but it's people who need data to actually do their work. And I'm going to share a few stories on some real life MDM, a day in the life of. So stick around for that. And then when we look at MDM for data scientists, these are the questions. You can maybe just scan through those. These are the typical questions that a data citizen cares about. All right, so put yourselves, or maybe you, most of you probably are in a position where you just use data daily for other reporting or to prepare reports or to get some insight or whatnot. And these kind of questions are always, it's coming into play at some point in time, right? So I need some data. Where is it? How relevant is it? Is it old? When last was it updated? If you have a bit of a security mindset, Howden, I was in a meeting earlier today when we spoke about, we were dealing with some data sets, and an immediate question was, okay, who has access to this? What's the retention period? Things like that. All right. So what's the level of importance? So it's typical questions that a data citizen in our discussion here would typically deal with. So if you ask any of these questions on a daily basis, or even on a weekly basis, sometimes when you use data, then you are a data citizen in one way or form. All right, so but before we go in, again, just a little bit of refresher on what exactly is MDM or why we should worry about it. Look, at the end of the day, you need to do MDM for one of these three reasons. It can all be boiled down into one of these. You either need to increase your efficiency of your operations, in other words, improve a process, make something faster, make something easier, or you need to comply to, for example, the papaya compliance, deadline coming in June, or you need it for analytics. Especially if you're a data scientist, you'll know that the classic sort of number that's been thrown around always is 80% of data science is just data prep and dealing with clean data and so on. And MDM helps in that regard. So it's one of these three things that you would want to look at MDM. I don't want to spend too much time on this slide, but this has been a really useful slide from Dama, a useful picture. And something we always have to remember, and people very often miss this, is there's a big difference between MDM, managing master data, as opposed to using master data. Okay, so today's focus is a little bit more on the use and what we need to do with to use the data. But the disciplines around MDM is really about managing it so that it can be used productively in one of these three areas. Hoping that makes sense. You're welcome to interrupt me as well. I can see hands, or Paul will catch it. Another just very important slide from Dama is just where does it fit into the dependency matrix of Dama. So this is where master data plays in right there, right? And this is important because normally, I mean, there's a lot of attention and buzzwords and excitement around, especially analytics and data science, which of course has its merit. But as we just mentioned, also a lot of that depends on clean data, and master data is just under that. In other words, for this stuff to work well, this needs to be in place. We're not talking about warehouse now; it's not necessarily important, but dealing with your master data is something you are doing right now today. You might not be doing it very well, or you might not be doing it in an efficient way, but everybody manages their master data in some way, whether it's in a spreadsheet, shared openly, or secured, or in some kind of a system. So it's just a matter of how well you're doing it, and is it actually helpful? Is it actually helping your master data to be an asset to your business? And you can see it rests on top of a lot of other things, especially around systems and applications. It's a big block there, and it's because lots of times we get into organizations, even big organizations, where a lot of operational data or data that's being used by management still sit in spreadsheets. That'll never go away. But if your master data is only present in spreadsheets and so on, it's gonna affect the quality of that. It's going to also affect what you can do with it from a usage point of view. Whether you create reports, visualizations, process optimization, or compliance. And then when we do master data management projects, for example, a lot of these things, we mentioned that last time how it is, a lot of these things is really being pulled together in the MDM disciplines, which is why I really like MDM. When you do MDM, you'll inevitably meet people that do data modeling, data architecture, integration, design, application development, front-end development, even, and we'll get to a little bit to that. And so, yeah, MDM is just a very nice thing that brings a lot of aspects together.
So, sorry, Paul.
Yeah.
I think one also has to be a little bit careful about the order here, because, for example, one of the customers that we worked on, they had Oracle procurement, and there was a procure to pay, and it was battling with its master data. And so, for example, on the procurement, they had different products with different units and quantity breaks and things like that. And in some cases, they were managing the materials for the canteen, and they would have Coke in 24 units in 2 liters, and then different areas, and it became quite a nightmare in terms of keeping this product list up to date. And so what you do find very helpful is if you get your master data right, then establishing an application that requires, of course, all applications require a level of master data, customer, products, vendors. They would source their data from the master data system. And I know we spoke about last time where almost the last step after you get your master data established, of course, getting from certain applications, you then go through the process of harmonizing the applications. And that is a process of, in some cases, switching off the authoring of your master data within procurement. And we actually did that on one case where we prevented them from setting up a vendor within the system that had to come from the master data. And you'll see Oracle has integrated most of its applications into the customer hub, the product hub, and it doesn't author the data itself. It gets the data from the master data system.
Yeah, that's actually one of the principles that I was going to bring to this discussion today, because we for example, implemented an MDM system where some of the authoring actually happens there. But we'll get to that. That's a good discussion point. All right. So, any questions at that point in time?
Go for it. Well, I'll keep a monitor on the chat.
All right. Okay, so a nice summary slide that I created whilst working for Ultron. So just keeping just creating them here. But really, if you want to boil master data management down into its essential components, then starting on the left here, what is master data? Well, it's any noun or any subject of a sentence. Any noun in your sentence will typically be master data, and it could refer to other people, places, or things. People like customers, patients, employees, places, hospital locations, addresses, and things like chart of accounts or products. And the management of the master data is really about 3 things too. It's about getting it and curating it and sharing it. All the other things are just sort of packed around these concepts, really. You need to get it because master data typically lives in many places. You have, for example, information in your customers, maybe in your CRM, in your main accounting system, and maybe also in a spreadsheet. And and marketing needs to use it. So, and they may keep its own data. So, how do you get the best version of data for a particular person? How do you make sure you get the best, get the right telephone numbers or the right details or the right familial connections and so on? You need to master those things in a central place and then share it out to be used by other systems. And again, it's going to be for one of those 3 things: analytics, operational improvement, or compliance.
Sorry,
I like to keep.
Sorry.
Yes.
When you go back to the slide, so this topic is on reference data and master data. So is reference data the same as master data?
That's a good question. We'll talk a little bit about reference data specifically, but it's kind of in this picture, it's represented typically here in the things part, and reference data it's a little bit different to master data. We'll see exactly how, but it's part of the ecosystem of this discussion.
Okay.
I like mind maps, and I like this one. I think Veronica created this one. It's not to go through it, but it just to show you this was all from the DM box. So if you don't have your copy of the DM box yet, I don't get any commission when you buy it, but I think it's a good idea to have one. This is basically the chapter summed up, and we touch on some of these things in this presentation. From the DM box, maybe just quickly a few formal definitions, just to cement our understanding of what this is. So this is referring to the management of master data. It is the managing shared data, which is important. It's data that is shared across the organization, not just used by one department or one group. And it's shared to meet organizational goals, reduce risks with data redundancy, and to enforce high quality, and also reduce the cost of integration. So this is a more formal definition, but again, you're basically going to do it for one of those three things. Those organizational goals will typically fall into compliance, operational efficiency, or analytics. All right, so this is just for reference. You've probably scanned through the text here. Don't want to read a slide. And by the way, every knowledge area, in other words, MDM, integration, BI, data modeling, in the DM box, all of those knowledge areas, we've got a chapter, and every chapter has the summary page. So this makes for great quick reference. So just doing a little bit of DM box punting there. Okay, so some guiding principles around MDM. And again, so from a data citizen point of view, especially if you're a data steward, if you need to steward data, these concepts will be quite important to you. Again, MDM is about the shared data. It's data that is typically slowly changing. In other words, it's not transactional. It's data about your customers, your vendors, your employees, your reference lists, your lookup lists, things like that. And it's important to remember that ownership is the master data belongs to an organization. Now, I've been on quite a number of MDM projects, and it very easily becomes a bit of a political situation, not even necessarily malicious. It's just when you're in a department that has data, and especially if you put a lot of elbow grease into curating that data, it becomes important to you, and it's something that you might have shaped in a way that fits your unique purposes. You maybe were creating reports or wanted to get insight, and it's of sort of personal value to the group who created it. This reminds me of a story when I was just starting out. I think this was my second job, and I had to work on some Excel data. And I was working at the time for an Italian lady, which was very, let's say, passionate and emotional, and it could go either very good or very bad for you. And I had to work on a spreadsheet data, and this was in a telco in the cell phone industry. And the data that I provided her was wrong, and I didn't know it at the time, and obviously neither did she. It was at the time, and the company culture was like that as well, very competitive, very, sort of, people were quite provocative and sort of arrogant about who's right and who's wrong. It was, it was one of the mobile operators, and so back then, if you hit a million, if you hit 2 million subscribers, it was still a thing, and the data that I provided was wrong. Oh man, I was in such big trouble. I was shouted at and whatnot, and rightly so. But the point is that I publicly, the data that I provided publicly humiliated this lady, and it's purely because of it's a master data issue, really, at the heart of it. Yeah, so it can cause problems, and it's not a proud moment that I have, but it shows you. So master data management is important. Don't do it in spreadsheets. All right, you've read through those, I'm sure. So just guiding principles. When you do MDM, you inadvertently actually also addresses data quality. Stewardship and ownership is a very important difference when we talk about this stuff. The organization should own it, but like in any asset, a data steward needs to be accountable for controlling and ensuring the quality is high. All right. Okay, just coming back to your question. So when we look at reference data, before we go on to some stories, the reference data aspect of MDM is really about making sure that the things that you typically look up, if you can put the word lookup after a noun, it's probably a list of reference data. And it could be any one of these. It could be normal lists, like the standard list of country codes, the ISO country codes, for example, a list of currencies, typically things like that. It could be proprietary or internal reference data. In other words, your internal product codes for your products. If you're in the medical field, it's things like your NAPI codes and things like that. Those are actually industry reference data, which is the third point there. It is data that's specifically provided, that's standard for the industry reference data, but your internal stuff mostly talks to the codes and the systems that you've internally developed to keep track of your products, especially things like that. It could be geographical or geospatial. So in other words, maybe country codes is an example of that, but standard lists of cities, of countries, of provinces and things like that. And this is why it's easy for a click view or a Tableau or a Power BI to look at data, understand that it's looking at geodata and just drop it onto a map, right? Because the whole world, maybe not the whole world, but most people kind of uses the same reference data when it comes to geospatial reference data. It could be something like computational reference data. So for example, if you're in the insurance industry or finance, then a time-stamped table of exchange rates, for example, would be what we're talking about here, or just standard reference data metadata. So when your internal, your internal actual master data contains metadata, and that often is linked to standard lookups, standard things that you want to call certain things. That's also kind of reference data. So reference data is sort of a subset of the whole master data paradigm, but it could be serious enough to just get the sole focus on that. So for example, at Sanlam, our team at Altron, they are doing a reference data management implementation using EBX, and it takes a team of people to get that done properly, especially if it's a big organization like that. And it's because so many systems and departments look to the same lookup codes, and if that isn't standardized, controlled, curated, protected, workflowed, then things like cross-departmental reports, for example, gets difficult, or really any sort of analysis that you want to do in your data. Okay.
So just, I know there may be a few application people around that have joined. This was the experience I had with reference data was a lot of the programmers were putting these codes or these lists into what .NET and C referred to as an enum. And that's how they would manage the lists that were permissible within a drop-down box in some cases. And that created lots of pain when for example, if you had a state of the customer or a state of a cash in transit, the one system I worked in, and then they wanted to change the state and they had to go and change the code in all of these different areas. And I remember us in going through this process, having some failures, causing problems. And from then on, we had to establish this reference data management. So there was no form of code lists in any of the code that people were working with.
Yeah, the enums, it's convenient, aren't they? And I mean, even some of the MDM software that I'm familiar with, for example, EBX, you create your data model, and it's very easy to just put the allowed values into that list, and you can deploy your model quickly and actually use it, put some data into it. But then what you're sacrificing is to update that thing without it becoming a whole deployment again, or you depending on technical people to do those updates. So it's always, but sometimes it's warranted, right? So sometimes, I mean, somebody once told me that solution design is really, it's all about calculated compromise. It's sad to see it that way, but like you can't do everything perfectly with the time and budget that you have. So what do you not do, and where do you take the calculated risks and whatnot?
Yeah.
All right. So just one slide on the typical organization. What I like about last week, we spoke more about what MDM models. We spoke to the information, the EIM managers, and they need to think about things like federation and or not federation. For example, a federated operating model, or a centralized one, or a decentralized one, and also data stewardship styles. But for this discussion, it's just look simply. In any MDM program, you're gonna have these kind of people. Basically, you're gonna have your execs, which has the vision, they can communicate, and they have some kind of a mandate to do something great. All right, but they're thinly spread and so on, but they do have the authority, and the funding comes from them. The decision makers, typically in the information governance board of some sort, consists of senior business people, senior stakeholders, typically managers, and they can say yes or no to things, but they need information and input into the decision-making process so that they can actually make the decision. And that's where you get the thinkers and the planners. So these guys know what should happen, and they can work out what that needs to be, but somebody else needs to fund it and needs to okay it because just because of how the funding process work, and also how strategic versus tactical vision works within the company. So in a larger company, you're going to have more formal ideas of this. In a smaller company, you might have some overlaps here, but essentially, you need the thinkers and the planners, and they are typically MDM program managers and the data stewards, chief data stewards, we often call them. They're the real brains behind how to do this efficiently and make things work. And then sort of at on the last gray block is people whose day will be directly affected based on changes and decisions that's being made. Okay, so when we talk about data citizens, especially if you I mean, this stuff is not so much relevant if you're a scientist, a data scientist, or a data user, but if you're a data steward, you're going to sort of land there on the yellow block somewhere, probably. Okay, so let me tell you a few stories of how this stuff looks like in real life. So we did this project at a retailer, and one of the first things I wanted to do is they wanted to implement a loyalty program. You're looking at my dog Spitz with a Z. It's an Afrikaans Spitz. I just need to make sure you understand that. Like a Spitzoor, in English. How would that be in English if your dog's ears are pricking up like that? So Spitz in Afrikaans, that's what it means. And it's a rescue puppy that we got during lockdown. Okay, so he's very loyal and also very naughty. Okay, so they wanted to get a loyalty program going. And they had the vision to know that, look, we can't do this loyalty program unless we actually get a good grip on our master data. And they had the vision to just make sure that loyalty is all about getting more accurate knowledge of my current customers. All right, and they had a good knowledge of their account holders, but they didn't know about the cash customers or potential customers. They have prospects, and they got customer lists that they maybe gathered some information about people ethically, but they don't know much about them apart from names and basic contact information. So if you can master your customer data, you will have a better loyalty program, and that's how they thought. Now, interestingly enough, these guys operate across Africa, so you could apply for an account with these guys using a passport or an ID book, meaning it's very easy actually to have two separate accounts without them knowing that you're the same person. It's sort of different identification numbers. One is an ID number, one is a passport number. Names matching only works so well. So they had this issue, and on top of that, they wanted their customers. It's a group of retailers. It's a group of companies, right? The retailer. So you can open an account at store A and store B, and you wouldn't. It's two accounts. They wanted to keep it that way. And this is sort of contrary to how we think, but they have the business reasons for that. So you need to have 2 accounts, and your contact details is linked to that particular profile, so that they also didn't want it merged. So if you give one number, if you apply in at store A in Botswana and store B in Botswana, they want your details to be separate. So we had to kind of keep all these things nicely separated in our design. So they don't want to duplicate people, but they do want to keep other things separate. Okay, and so customer deduplication became, it's not so straightforward as you might think. There's actually a lot of business rules to follow through on to determine whether we're going to allow more than one record of a customer in. Now, just let me pause there. One of the most important, you could say the key, it's like when you're in a band, if the drummer can't keep the beat, there's a problem. He can do all kinds of good things. He can do fills and he can do fancy crashes from the cymbals, but if you can't keep time, it's an issue, right? So similarly, MDM can do a lot of things, but if it can't do identity resolution, it's useless. It's really what it's there for. It's one of the single most important things that a system needs to take care of. Again, simple problem statement, difficult to actually get right. So what we've done is we've actually designed the system for them. And okay, so what does this have to do with the data citizen? You remember I mentioned that they wanted to keep their data separate, but we need to make sure that no double, no duplicates come in. We go through a process of automatically determining whether somebody is a duplicate or not. And if it reaches a certain threshold of uncertainty, in other words, we are not quite certain we have this person in our books yet, it goes to a data steward. And in this case, they've got a team of data stewards actually every day just making sure a record comes in, they look at this person, is it the same person, yes or no, and they make a decision, and there we go. So it's a team of data stewards, and it's a bit of a trivial job, but it's so important for all the other things that they do, including customer analytics and things like that. Another example of that is in the medical industry, to determine whether certain products are the same. Product classification is notoriously difficult. I'm going to tell that story, I think, next week, right, Howard, about the Mediclinic story. I'll share more about that. But anyway, so in this case, the stewards are responsible for not only, this doesn't only speak to people who sits there and makes the decisions on the computer screen. That's important, but the chief data stewards, they need to make sure they understand or define the business rules about what makes somebody duplicate or not. In what way do we test for duplication? If we have if we have a passport and an ID book, and we've got information from both, how do we determine from all the data that we have what the golden sort of profile is, that elusive idea? So those are all data stewardship functions. They're involved in that process. The same organization, after they've implemented, they are now live, by the way, with their loyalty program, and it's going well. And the next thing we are doing for them is to optimize their store system. Now, this is where I'm sort of arguing with one of the MDM principles. That is about you should only. It has to do with the system of record and the system of reference. Typically, in the oldest sort of way of thinking, the master data record should be drawn from or derived from systems of record. But in this case, what we're doing is we're implementing a system that actually does more than just MDM. Okay, so why do I say that? Okay, so these guys, when a new mall opens up at the corner of your street, let's hope that doesn't happen. Let's hope it opens up a little bit further away. But let's say a mall opens and there's a store that they want to open in that mall. From the point of when that happens until it opens for trading, and even after when it closes down, that whole process needs to be managed. And there's a lot of data that needs to be moved around, a lot of data that needs to be shared between systems. You can just imagine all the things that's involved. Okay, I want to open a shop. What do I need to think about? Leasing agreements from the property guys in the mall itself. Trading space, like floor space in the shop. What brands am I going to put in there? How is my brand division going to be given, What staff do I need there? How far is it from the nearest other store? What combination of things do we put in there? How do we decorate it, etc. So all of these things were done by spreadsheets and emails and phone calls. There's no system that, well, there's no single system that helped them with this process. Certainly not a system to help them manage the process itself. And what we did is we used MDM. It's in fact still happening as an ongoing project. Using, in this case, we're using TIBCO EBX. What we're doing for them is we are both doing a process optimization. In other words, all the workflows that you need to actually get this thing from idea to concept is something we handle. It's also has a lot to do with data management, because it's a lot of reporting that comes out in this process, right? So everybody, they want to see, okay, we've got 500 stores that's being renovated. We've got 200 stores that's waiting for first stock, and so forth and so on. So there's a lot of data reporting and things that need to happen. So there's data management. Remember, there's a difference between management of data and usage of data. So this is about the management thereof. And in this case, the data that we're dealing with is more than just the master data. So is it a true master data project? Not really. Is it a master data project in essence? Yes, it is, because we're dealing with master data management. And this is where sort of in the modern application of MDM, we call this organic MDM. And we differentiate the organic MDM from a typical 360 view, like a 360 view of the customer. And there's very good use cases for and scenarios for both, and when to use what. In this case, we implemented a party-based customer MDM solution. We used the same platform to also build business process management in small caps that also deals with master data, and it's in one ecosystem. So, and again, so the data citizens here, who are they? Well, in this case, the data citizens are the guys who work in the property office, because they are the initiators of these kind of processes. When the lease gets signed, that, okay, we're going to open a shop, they are very protective. Well, they are basically the main stewards to kick this thing into gear and kick the process off and make sure the initial data quality is good and so forth. And they know at which point in time in the process, opening, signing the lease, getting stock done, assigning, appointing staff, recruitment, all of that. At different points in time, there's different things that's important from a data perspective. And it's a data citizen's work to work that out. And this is really the important thing. This is not IT people that does it. It's business people. And the business people have a dual role of data steward. A data steward is not a technical designation or anything like that. It's a role that they play. Also, another kind of data citizen in this case, the company's analytics team, they were big supporters of this process, because it makes their analytics a lot better and easier. So they've got a very active role in they sit in all the workshops where we go through the designs and the debates and so on. And I really love these sessions, because you learn actually so much about the business. I love consulting because of that. You bring something to the table. We know how to do MDM design and so on. What you get though is often a whole new world of how the business world works in a particular industry. So anyway, yeah. So that's
sorry,
yes.
Paul. I think you touched on a very important point, and we've actually got one of the questions at the end. Was sometimes when you bring in the master data and reference data, and it's all about the mindset change, the initial reaction from the business people can be, why am I doing something that IT should be doing, and why aren't they taking care of it? So it does have this effect, and the classic example is that of addresses, where the customer addresses are in a mess, and we know so many of those. There must be hundreds of us that have looked at a database with customer addresses and looked at that mess and thought, how would we ever clean this? When we try to get the business involved in cleaning, their first response is, I've got more than enough work at the moment. Now you want me to clean the data and fix the data that you made a mess of. How do you typically handle that sort of mindset change? And I know that Christine has all sorts of answers about that, but what do you do?
That's the question, because in these organic approaches, interestingly enough, Howard, in this case, we didn't find that because the business has a very direct interest in getting this right.
Yeah.
So stewards here, for example, the analytics team, I mean, they're not stewards. They are analytics team, but they are citizens in this case, right? But they make the time available, although they're very busy. They make the time available and make sure that somebody in their team is actually sitting in those workshops and listening and making sure the design goes to something that will eventually help them with dealing with the data that they need. I said that last time as well before. I think one very important thing to get right is when you embark on an MDM program, try to find a way to not call it MDM. Try to find a way to, like for example, the story I told today, it's a loyalty program. It's enabling loyalty. It is not implementing MDM, although that's what happened. It's about optimizing the store process. It's about that, but it's actually about store MDM. In this particular case, we could link the engagement or the project or the initiative or whatever, the program to implement MDM very, very directly to a business. I think that's quite key. I think in a more of a 360 view, you're definitely going to get more of that what you mentioned, because then, and we have been in that situation too. They kind of want to pass it off to an IT person to fix. It's okay, an IT person, quote unquote, or a data person, they do need to be involved in that process. They will probably be the ones who actually, implement the software or write the code to do some of those cleanups and so forth. But you need the business minds there. I was in a meeting today when I was actually a little bit concerned when I heard the plans of the company wanted to do something in a specific way, and they wanted to do exactly that. They wanted to offload something, a data cleanup process in this case. They wanted to offload that to an external party, and I don't think there's enough business representation in there because you can only do so much when you need to clean up your codes and all that. But at some point in time, a business mindset needs to come in and apply sense to it. Yeah. So I don't know. Maybe Christina has something to say. My view would be the best way to kind of not be in that situation is to make make sure MDM is linked clearly to a business problem solution.
Yeah, I think if I may just add exactly what you said, Paul, there are two critical ingredients. The one is to make it relevant within business context. So, if we start talking MDM and it's far removed, but if we start talking proper information, accurate reporting, that kind of thing, then there's a big understanding of what's in it for them. So to keep it within context of the business is what I'm saying. And then the second point would be role clarification. So, and I mean, I see your hands on the line as well. Sometimes, for example, the data stewards are under the impression that they are compliance officers, data compliance officers. And actually, it's not about that. It's about them articulating the business context and delivering on the business brief. So it's the role clarification of that and clearly spelling that out that then gets them to commit and use and drive and be part of it. So if you start right, it's no problem, but it's sometimes difficult to reverse that process.
Yeah, that's quite true. All right, just my last section, and thanks for seeing my last section, and then we can have more discussion. All right, so I wanted to show you this. I'm showing you some features here of good MDM software. In this case, it's TIPCO, just because I am firsthand aware of it. I have played with other tools as well. I'm just most familiar with this one. But it's not about TIPCO and the EBX product. It's about things that a good MDM solution must have, right? And from a citizen's point of view, it's really important because you'll spend a lot of time with this software. And I'm gonna come back to this, but I want to show you this. A good MDM tool, from a technology point of view, is actually going to be three things, right? So first of all, it's an app. It's an app because you are logging into it. You have a menu system, and you can go there, update data, create new data, tick off a workflow, etc. But it's also an MDM system. Under the hood there's a lot of things going on from a modeling perspective, from making sure you you just have a good design, and apart from the actual app, there's a lot of, it's not just a database. I said that last time as well. When people think there's a database where we can link all our customer data together and get the same keys there, that's more CDI. It's customer data integration. It's an old sort of, maybe that's a precursor of MDM. Maybe Howard can comment on that. But MDM is about more than that. It's not just about linking customer data together. There's a lot to it, and we'll go through the features. And then from a developer and an analyst perspective, application development perspective, it is a platform where you can write apps on or with. And that's exactly what we've done in this case, the stories that I shared now, and that I'll be sharing next week at MediClinic especially. It's a platform. In this case, it's a Java-based platform that you can actually write apps in, and it just gives you a big fast track because it takes care of automatic screens for your data captures and things like that. All right. Just want to get back to this. So typically in MDM, you have all of these things as part of your stack. You need to be able to model your data. In other words, create the schemas, create the tables and the fields, and so you can put data into it. It needs to be able to deal with data quality in some way. Not every MDM tool is great with this. You get tools that are specially designed just for the data quality bit. Things like just data lifecycle creation, make it easy to workflow and to control the creation, the update, delete, archiving, etc. of data. Things like hierarchy management. If you think about your lists, like if you think about, okay, there's a list of countries. There's the countries, and then there's provinces, and then there's cities, and so on. There's always hierarchies involved in reference data and other kinds of master data. So your system need to be able to take good care of things like that. Stewardship, again, it's an area where a data steward and sometimes even some of the other personas will spend a lot of time on. Workflow and security is an absolute given, and data integration is key to MDM. MDM is supposed to, remember, you're supposed to get data. That means integration. You need to curate it. That means workflows, stewardship, things like that. And it means sharing it again, which again comes back to integration. So it covers all these things. Some of the features that are available in good tools like this one is just easy ways to build in validation rules into your screens without too much code. Easy ways to do matching and merging, implement matching and merging algorithms. Security is a given. Versioning data spaces, I just want to stop here. This is so important. So let me give you an example here. If you needed to know, if you're in the finance world and you needed to know what your exchange rates were, the 1st of February 2019, that means you will have, if you have a good tool like this one, you'll have a version of data, how it looked like in a particular point in time, like a snapshot, which is why, again, it's not just a normal database with data in it. Your MDM system can deal with easily creating versions of data without duplicating that data or without making it very big from a storage point of view. Anyway, and so it's things like this. Graphing. Yes.
Yeah, just to share some experience there, on one of the customers, I was called in to help with a master data program. Every single time they had an organizational change, they would get to the end of the year, publish the final results, then take a backup of that database, and then apply the changes to the organizational structure, and then operate in the new organizational structure. So, and it was a big bank. And when they wanted to go back to a previous structure, they actually had to restore the database and get the previous structure so that they could then look at what the balance sheet would look like at that point in time. So once they made the structural changes, then all the numbers were reworked to almost represent the current structure. And that was a fascinating challenge that they had with the chart of account.
Yeah, it reminds me because I guess these days it's not much of a problem, but we had a situation like that where we had to restore a database for, this was the same, no, it was a different company that I worked for at the time. But then storage space was an issue. There wasn't space to restore the thing, and it was too, it was too cumbersome to, it's not just that you, right now in the cloud, just provision storage and there you go. It was a big thing to get approval for storage. It was expensive, and difficult and things broke, and so yeah. So a good MDM system would allow you to have that versioning available, and it's not backup and restore. It's actually there. You just need to point to it. It's based on. It's not the duplication of data. The data that has changed. If it's specifically, there's sort of an XML engine underneath it. You work with inheritance and things like that. Anyway, I'm running a little bit out of time. But okay, so you get the idea. So from a citizen's point of view, this stuff is important because you really, a lot of your day will be spent in software. And as you guys know, it could make or break your day if you work with a good system that's smooth and working well, as opposed to something that breaks all the time. I'm not going to do the Apple and Windows thing right now. So anyway, all right. I think that's my slides for now. I just made it, but shame there's not a lot of time for questions. Of course, we just stay on until everybody leaves. So happy to take questions or discussions or arguments. Disagreements is fine too.
So Paul, once you go to the question section, there were a few sections. The questions, we dealt with the first one where citizens would ask, why do they need to look after the data? And then there were a couple of instances in different customers where one customer felt that making use of a CRM system is a master data system. Why wouldn't you use a CRM system? Why do I need to create both? And then another comment that I've had to spend time explaining to say, well, why can't our applications do reference and master data management?
Yeah, so we chat around those.
So those are some of the questions. I don't know if I know we wanted to talk to Reno on her question. I did ask her to put it in the chat box, but and maybe just a brief discussion on, do you still remember a question, Paul?
I didn't get, it sounded to me like it's probably going to warrant a big whiteboard discussion with what she's asking for. So maybe we can wait until she does now. Let's deal with these on the board here. Yeah, I'm sort of a little bit conflicted because we have this exact situation at a customer at the moment, the second question there. And sometimes your organization won't have the patience or the appetite or the maturity to really sustain getting out of the blocks, because MDM, it is not a quick fix for anything. It does take time. It is a little bit invasive because you're dealing with the heart. You're dealing with your core business concepts. In other words, you're going to touch some nerves. It's like open heart surgery, or it could be. And sometimes the only thing that you can do is to do the minimum and do better master data management without a master data management system. Lots of people do it. Lots of big companies too. That's why there's still a lot of new discussions around MDM, because some have tried, some have failed, some are trying again, some are doing something different. But it's what you won't get is if your normal operational systems is there without a more formal MDM system, you're going to actually deal with all the things in MDM. You're going to deal with it manually. You're going to have to deal in some way with getting it integrated, getting it managed, getting your lists shared, for example, across different systems. The sharing of your master data, it's going to happen anyway. You can't not do it. So if you leave it, in other words, if you don't go for an MDM solution specifically, it'll land up with your integration layer. It'll land up with perhaps I'm thinking of people, especially if you have SAP in the house. The question is often, well, we've got SAP wall to wall. What do we need MDM for? And maybe there's a good point to it, but there's lots of other systems that actually do make use of the reference and master data in those systems that are not SAP. But anyway, it's going to have to be a cost benefit analysis every time. I also want to say, if you can't link your MDM dreams to a real problem, rather don't do it. Because don't do it formally, because you're going to get nowhere. You need to have the executive support, but as importantly, if not more importantly, is you have to get the buy-in. I don't even like the word buy-in. You need the active pushing by business to solve these kind of problems, and the way to do it rightly is with MDM. Failing that, you're gonna end up with some manual system anyway. The second one, the CRM, that's also a good one, because they do get confused sometimes. And in fact, we've advised a customer once to first, they wanted to know whether they should do MDM or not. And we said, we did a bit of an analysis and so on. And we said, look, actually, we would rather you don't, because at that point in time, they were implementing, it wasn't a CRM, it was a multi-channel marketing solution, but it's the kind of concepts here are similar. We said, don't do it, because your whole business, everybody that's important to contribute to the discussions around MDM solutioning and so on, their minds are with this marketing system that you have. So if you can't get your business attention, it's going to be difficult, rather don't. If a lot of money and energy and time is being spent on getting another big system in, be careful, because MDM does take time. I mean, it must take time, because you're thinking through your core business processes. You're thinking through your core business rules. You often people have implemented MDM because they wanted to change their whole way of thinking and of operating. We've had a customer like that. So yeah, it's a pretty deep process from a business philosophy point of view. Now, CRM can't do the things that MDM does. CRM often doesn't have the flexibility to, for example, really deal with roles in the true sense. You have in CRM, you've got a progression. You've got a contact or something like that. You've got it transitions into a prospect, then it becomes a customer, then it becomes something else. So there's a linear sort of progression on how those things work. And sometimes, if it's a badly designed system, it's actually data duplication. So if you take that same concept and you implement MDM, what you'll do is you'll have a party model of one party, which is a person, and you'll have that person playing different roles, like, for example, a prospect or a customer or an employee. And those roles are transient. In other words, it is time bound. It is only valid for a certain period of time before it either progresses to something else or it stops altogether. Also, CRM has very limited ways in which it can integrate data into your system, deal with workflows and so on, publish it out again. Of course, many of these systems are customizable, so you can write the code for it. Right now, we have a customer that implemented the CRM system and actually became one of their main business systems, and they have lots of tears, lots of tears about it, because what they would have, it would have been a lot better if they actually just implemented MDM to take care of that problem. Right now, there's a lot of crowbarring and customization they have to do to take care of those sort of requirements. So it simply isn't the same thing. Although, again, sometimes you only have funding for one or two of these things, or the business appetite is not there and so on. Then you have to kind of make do. Then you say, all right, well, I don't have an MDM. I'm going to do as best I can with what I have, and maybe that's CRM. But maybe my last comment on CRM, something I don't like is this thing about, the idea of a contact. In CRM, you've got a person and there's a phone number, for example, connected to it. But the phone number is often just an attribute. Okay, so that in itself can be a little bit messy. What we are, for example, doing in a good party-based MDM solution is, when we deal with contact points, is we say, all right, so there's a relationship between the person and his cell phone number. Let's put it that way. And that relationship is also transient, because you can lose your phone number, it can get recycled and whatnot. Eventually, if you want to deal with that kind of data from an analysis perspective or just from a mastering perspective, you are going to lose the fact that a particular number had a lifetime and it had connections with more than one of your customer records over time. Maybe a better solution here is an address for an insurance company, right? So if you're an insurance company, you care about your policyholders, but if you also master your addresses in the same way, in other words, you only ever have one copy of an address in your database, and you've got links from that address record to a person. If you do stuff like that, you can much easier over time deal with the history of a certain address, a house that you're insuring or whatnot, things like that. The CRM it doesn't do stuff like that, and there's a lot of, sorry about my dogs. There's a lot of I don't know. I don't like CRM because it tries to solve problems simplistically, and you always paint yourself into a corner. And maybe somebody can take me on there and maybe stick another answer to you. But That's my view.
Thanks, Paul. I'm wondering if there are any other questions. Are there, you guys, if you can put your hand up or ask them, put them in the chat. I'd be happy to ask Paul. Are there any questions from the group?
Just the dog's asking a few questions, I hear. But guys, I'm going to stop the recording there. Just, but not saying that others can't ask questions. I'll stop the recording so long. And if there's a question that the group may enjoy that already left, we can put that on LinkedIn and just discuss it there as well.
Thanks.
Those that are about to leave, thanks very much for your time. Paul, thank you very much. It was awesome again. Look forward to next week. Thanks, Howard. Thanks for everything.
Thank you.
Right. Thank you. Thanks so much.
Thank you.